to another tips and tricks. In this video we're going to look at tuning the sail, and obviously there's a lot of different sail brands out there, so this is going to be a general overview for sort of, I'm going to be looking at wave sails to start with and then maybe sort of more free-ridey sails towards the end. But yeah, this is just a general guide. The best thing to do, I recommend, if you've got a specific sail brand that you're using, is to go online and see if there's any forums or videos, and they can give you just like the really specific guides on how to tune your sail. Now, back in the day they used to put quite a lot of downhaul on the sail. This meant that the sail had quite a loose leech at the top, and this is just generally the way they designed sails back in the days with the balls that they had back in the day. But nowadays it's a little bit different. We don't put as much downhaul as before, and this might catch people out. Some of the guys who have been sailing a long time might still be using a little bit too much downhaul than necessary. Now, on all the duotone sails, they actually have a marking which you can see exactly the minimum and the maximum of the downhaul which you can put on, which is really helpful. Some of the sail brands do that as well and some don't, but we're going to take a look at that now. So if your sail does have a maximum and minimum guide on it, I would recommend you don't go past any of the two. But what I'm going to talk about now is where you'd put them in different kind of conditions. So if it's really windy, you put a little bit more downhaul on and go more towards the max. That's going to make the sail less powerful, it's going to make the sail flatter, but it might make it a little bit more twitchy. If it's not as windy, you're going to want to put a little bit less downhaul on than if it's really windy. This makes the sail a little bit fuller and gets a bit more power in the sail and makes the sail feel nice and soft when it's a little bit less windy. How much downhaul you put on also really depends on what kind of sail you have. For example, wave sail, you put a lot more downhill on than a freestyle sail, for instance. In a freestyle sail, they have almost no loose leech at all, and it keeps the sail really nice and flat and powerful for going in light winds. Whereas a slalom sail, they have, again, quite a lot of loose leech. They put quite a lot of downhill on. So obviously, take a look at what sails you have and do a little bit of research on them as well, because different brands have different kind of downhaul you have to put on them. Okay, so now we're going to take a look at boom height. Now, boom height is pretty important actually. Now, to give you a rough guide, you want to start off with around chest height, I'd say. Between sort of chest and chin height, you don't really want to go too far at the moment. And then, again, it changes on the conditions. If you want to get playing a little bit quicker, then I'd recommend you put the boom a little bit higher, and that just lifts the front of the board up a little bit more. And if you want a little bit more control when it's super windy, you can put that boom down a little bit, and that's going to keep the nose of the board down and keep you nice and controlled. If you don't have the chance to check your boom height while on the board and you have to take the sail off the board, just be aware that you're going to add a little bit more with that with the base plate on the bottom of the sail. So just be aware of that when you're checking your boom height if the sail isn't on the board yet. For all of these kind of tuning tips, it is a lot about personal preference. So with boom height, you see a lot of wave sailors, for instance, some of them like a high boom and some of them like a low boom. That's totally up to you and something that you can try out on the water. That's just up to your style. Again, with freestylers, a lot of them tend to have high booms, and with slalom sailors, of course, they have quite high booms because when they're raking that sail back, it actually gets a lot lower when you're raking it back. So the last tuning bit we're going to look at is the outhaul. Most all brands will have on the sail the details of the extension that you need on the boom, and that should first of all give you a pretty good idea on how long you want your boom. Normally they're not super accurate, but they're going to give you a good idea. You're not going to be 5 centimeters off, you might be 1 or 2 centimeters off. Okay, now we're going to come to the tuning bit. So this depends on the conditions a little bit. If it's quite windy, then you're going to put a little bit more tension on the outhaul. So you might, come and touch the end of the boom a little bit. While if it's less windy, you might allow a centimeter off a little bit or a little bit more if it's really light. And then the next real thing is to just test it on the water. So generally, if you're sailing around and you're feeling really backhanded, back heavy, and your harness lines you feel are in the right place, then it's probably likely that you don't have enough outhaul on the sail. And also another way to see this is if the sail is touching the boom really easily on the water and also wrapping around the boom, that's a real no-go, and that means you don't have enough outhaul on the sail. Now towards the other extreme, if it's really windy and you're feeling the sail's just really twitchy all the time, then you've probably got a little bit too much outhaul on, especially if you're looking at the sail and it's looking super flat, then just let out a little bit of outhaul. When it's super tight like that, the sail is not working how it's meant to be. They haven't designed it to work like that. So just be aware that you might end up feeling more comfortable if you let out a little bit of outhaul. It's it's not always going to be the more outhaul you put on, the more control you have, because you know they don't design the sails to be like that. Now I see a lot of people when they're rigging up on the beach pushing down onto the sail to sort of recreate the wind onto the sail. Now I wouldn't use this as a really specific guide, I'd use this as a rough guide. So if you're pushing down not very much and the sail's just touching the boom super easily, you definitely haven't got enough on. And the other way around, if you're pushing down with all your force and it's nowhere near the boom, then you haven't got you've got too much on. So I'd use this as a rough guide. I wouldn't use it as a specific guide, because people of course have different, you know, some people are stronger and can push the sail down more than others. So use this as a general guide and not a specific guide, and then you can get a little bit of more of a specific feel on the water.